In the distant future, vampires rule the night, but their numbers are dwindling. One podcast is unlike all the others. Half human, half vampire. This is Lefty Speaks, the official podcast for Vampire Hunter D.
Hello, hunters, and welcome back to Lefty Speaks, the Vampire Hunter D podcast. Today, we've got a special guest with us, the creator of the Iyanu graphic novel and the Iyanu animated series, which is now available on Cartoon Network and streaming on Max. So, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. We are doing our best to make sure we avoid any spoilers as we discuss adapting for animation from graphic novel, manga, and with Vampire D, obviously, from light novel. So, today, we were going to go over talking with Roye to hear his story in creating Iyanu, and Roye and Brandon in working through the adaptation for all the scripts, running the writer's room, and what it takes to adapt for animation because of all the differences that go into making an animated series versus a live action series or movie, because they are really, really different.
Oh, yeah.
And your script has so much to do with how you animate and your budget spending. So I'm looking forward to hearing the stories from the trenches of these guys who led the effort to bring us this brand new series. So, Roye, would love to hear a little from you on, the just creating this, I will call it a bit of a superhero story, and some of the things that inspired you for it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me here. It's a pleasure, it's an honor, and I think this is going to be fun, first of all. So let me just put that out there. But yeah, so Iyanu, a lot of people don't know that Iyanu was actually I believe my ninth or 10th graphic novel that I produced. So I started off self-publishing in 2015, and then I got a 10-book deal with Dark Horse in 2019. But in between those 4 or 5 years, I literally produced on Kickstarter, like I said, 9 or 10 graphic novels. Iyanu was I believe, ninth book. So just people out there, this is how long sometimes it takes to to really get things going. But let's talk about Iyanu specifically. It's an action adventure fantasy story. It's also a coming of age story about a 14-year-old teenager, Iyanu, who discovers that she has powers that rival the gods of her land. And it's only these powers that can save the entirety of Yoruba land, which is the world that the story takes place, from what we call the corrupt, which are essentially animals that have gone berserk, and the only purpose they have is to destroy humanity. The irony with Iyanu is that for her, when she gets her power, she isn't heralded as a hero. She's basically turned into an outcast. And for me, that's really where the story sort of starts to kick in as something that's is both familiar and feels different. Because for Iyanu at that point in time, she really now needs to decide what she wants to use her powers for. Because the same people that she needs to save are the same people that sort of like throw her out. And for me, I think it's one of the key things that I always like to bring back in terms of the themes of the story is one of empathy. Iyanu is a character that is not necessarily perfect, but one of our strongest points is empathy. And the reason that I wanted to put that in our main character is because I feel like as a world today, we could all use a lot more empathy. In Iyanu's case, she has to save people that don't necessarily like her, agree with her, or even want to see her alive. So for me, I feel like it takes another level of being a hero to save people that don't necessarily even want you to be around them. So that's sort of like a very brief synopsis about the story and the themes and what for me personally I was trying to do with the book. It's also for me a chance to express my culture. I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria. Through the medium of comic books and now animation, I've always look, I fell in love in animation as a 5-year-old. And I think all of us here, we've watched the same things growing up: Batman, Superman, Ninja Turtles, X-Men, Transformers. Like literally everything. I was in front of the TV. But for me, I've always wanted to tell these type of stories from the Nigerian perspective. And Iyanu sort of gave me that opportunity to not only do it as a graphic novel first, but thankfully, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to then be creator and executive producer on the animated, series as well. I have a lot more to say, but I want to pass it on to Brandon because for me, we wouldn't be here today without Brandon. Brandon wrote the first two scripts, and Brandon was very, very instrumental in adapting the graphic novel and also being a mentor for me because I was also in the writer's room. Brandon has been a terrific mentor, and Brandon essentially, I always knew I had the talent to write for TV, but I learned how to write for television, specifically animation from Brandon. So yes, at some point we met, we got together, and I let him tell the story about how we took it from graphic novel and then into the animated space.
And Roy, I love the fact that you mentioned how many books you've made over the last decade before you got to here. I think
Yes.
that's something a lot of people miss, is that it's not just
I mean, absolutely, and and I think sometimes, like, when not everybody does this, but sometimes when we share success stories, we sometimes try to hide the parts that were painful. And to me, I don't think that does anybody justice. Anybody that's trying to do the same thing that we're doing, it doesn't give them a full picture as to some of the things that I feel like going into something like this, you have to know. I can share so many stories about, having to work multiple jobs while I was doing this as doing this on the side, or going in and out of jobs, or not having enough money to do certain things I wanted to do, or having to make so many sacrifices to hone my craft. But I think it's important for people to know that, especially when it comes to just even the comic book space, it's a beautiful medium that has a lot. It gives a lot of people opportunity, but the comic book industry can be very brutal to creators, especially new ones.
Yeah, first, Roy, I want to welcome you to our show. It's a pleasure to have you here. And, the launch of Iyanu has gone incredibly well. One thing I want
Thank
to
you.
be clear is that, Roy was the executive producer and showrunner on the series, and I was the head writer slash story editor. And so he was a part of every aspect of the adaptation because, I was sent the graphic novel while I was still working at Blizzard Entertainment, and I was able to actually work on the adaptation piece. And the one thing I always say about adaptation is that you have to find the emotional bullet points that you have to hook an audience with as soon as humanly possible. I mean, we've seen it. We talk about Vampire Hunter D in both the original 1985 film and Bloodlust. Everything is established very, very quickly. There's not a lot of like hemming and hawing. And with Iyanu, the world was so detailed and rich, and the lore going in both directions, backwards and forwards, was just really, really massive. So what I wanted to do was figure out a way to relay some of the very, very important information very quickly without it being an exposition dump.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things we did. And so when I wrote episode 101, we handed it over to our executive team, and they were like, "This is cool, but we need to see how you resolve the cliffhanger." So then they said, "Hey, write episode 102." So that's what we did. And then on the strength of that, I mean, this is like over many, many months, but on the strength of that, we got the green light to go forward. And that's kind of like the bedrock of how everything got started. Now, the writer's room is really where the magic really happened.
Hmm.
And we can talk about that if, either Scott, Neal, or anyone has any questions directly, we can talk about that process.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just fascinated at the whole. I mean, I saw one of your Facebook posts, and I mean, it's just so exciting because once you know, obviously most of my focus is in live action
Hmm.
adaptation from video games or novels like in
Hmm.
Solomon Kane. So, but it's so different, and like you guys, I'm also, a comic book fan. I've been reading since I was a little kid. So I'm just so excited. And then after watching the first 3 episodes, uh, man, I'm just like, yeah, I mean, it's solid world building. I mean, I love the world already, and I want to know more. And I love Iyanu already. And like you said about empathy, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, those things popped out just immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, I mean, just I love this the medium, because there's so much you can tell. And
Yeah,
then also each medium has its own unique qualities
correct.
that can express something slightly different in a different way. And for me, I love reading, getting all of them, whether it's the comic book and the movie, the animated
Mhm.
series, the video game, and see what else I can pull in, what can inspire me. So I'm just happy to mostly sit and listen to your guys' story, because I know I'm sure a lot to say.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. Means a lot, and I think I can speak for Brandon as well. Coming from you, that is very very high praise, because yeah, those are, as a creator and as a writer, I think there's no better feeling than when you can have an intent going into, here's what I want people to feel, and then hear the audience say that back to you. So the fact that you can pick out those themes of empathy, because for me that's is very big. Like that's something that's just personally for me as a human being, it's something that I have been trying to develop more. It's one of the reasons why Iyanu is such an inspiring character. It's because I want to be like her. Like a lot of people don't understand. Even just having empathy, even when you're a good person, is not easy, because human beings, we are inherently selfish. Like we just want to take care of
Mhm.
ourselves. Like okay, me. And empathy is a very hard thing to have. So yeah, like look, I mean, the compliment doesn't it's not going over my head. I just wanted to let you know that I respect that, and thank you so much for saying that. It means a lot.
Yeah, and we nailed in on the empathy
Yeah.
theme as many times as humanly possible. So the way it worked was that, we went out to find some writers. A couple of them I knew, but most of them I did not.
Hmm.
And some people were recommended by executives. And when I met them and interviewed them, it was perfect. It was a perfect fit, because it doesn't always happen that way when you get a writer's room together. You don't know these people sometimes. But on the very first day, I said, I believe that any problem that happens can be solved with an adult conversation, because I had been in writers' rooms where things got out of hand, where sometimes showrunners have their friends in the room with them and they become what I call the favorites, and they
Hmm.
can get away with anything and there's no repercussion, right? I never wanted to emulate that kind of scenario. So I made sure that everybody was a mature adult. I think that's the first key to the show, is that everybody was a grown up and behaved like a grown up, which is not always the case in LA. So, and you know what I'm talking about. So,
I think we all do,
so
sadly.
with that said, I came in prepared, because I went through Roy's work, Roy and Godwin Akpan, who was the artist. I went through their work. Scott's having a ball.
It's hilarious what
I
you say.
went through their work, and I said, okay, this is so lush, but all of this can't go in.
Hmm.
There's no
Mhm.
way,
Hmm.
because there was so much world building, so many characters that we had to roll out, and the fact that we had something that was unfamiliar, which is Nigerian Yoruba specific culture.
Hmm.
That's not something you see. You see some actors from that background, very big actors worldwide, right? But you don't really see the day to day, the food, the
Hmm.
clothing, the colors,
Hmm.
the flora and fauna. Like we don't
Hmm.
know about a lot about a lot of people don't know about West Africa, or specifically
Hmm.
Nigeria, right? So we had to find the things that were universal but specific. We had to find the things that were relatable. So I was looking for scenes in the first, I'd say 30 to 40 pages of the graphic novel that would translate very well to TV. Now, this is my first time running a writer's room, and there were a couple of mistakes that I made, but were not horrible mistakes, just learning experience mistakes about timing, table reads, things of that nature, which we'll get into. But that was really the foundation of the show, was making sure that our writers room and everyone in it felt comfortable and supported. And as long as we had that, everything just flowed together extremely well. We had Matt
Mm-hmm.
Wayne, Ivory Floyd, Cary Grant, who was an Emmy Award winner, is an Emmy Award winner, and myself. And that's how everything got kicked off.
I also wanted to. Oh, go ahead, Neil. I know you're
Well,
going.
I just wanted to say real quick because there's so many things I want to say, but I don't want to interrupt. But when you were talking about like, so I'm one of those people that I don't know a lot about the different countries and cultures
Mm-hmm.
in Africa. Obviously, I'd like to think of myself as worldly, and I watch a lot of movies, but we all have our specialties, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so um, I have to admit that as soon as I watched the first episode, I'm like, I paused it and I pulled out my phone and I'm like chat GPT questions on, on the comic book, where you're from, the culture, trying to like almost had like a little study session on the side. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, obviously, you never know as someone who doesn't know that culture very well, like what is fictional, like what is completely
Mm-hmm.
created by you guys,
Mm-hmm.
and what stems from like cultural, like the mythology and the culture. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why I really love having new shows like this,
Mm-hmm.
because it inspires me, much like when I was 10 years old, I studied
Right.
all about Japan because
Right.
of the miniseries Shogun.
Mm-hmm.
I went and lived in Japan for the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I can't get enough about that culture. And then obviously just went and saw Sinners last night, and
Right.
wow, I can't do enough deep dive about that either. So
But
again,
you brought up a very good point, because for me personally, I think this is where the beauty of entertainment shines, and I think this is what we as creators and everybody in the industry needs to focus more on. Right? What you said is so apropos, because I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria. I learned about American culture through the TV. Right,
Mm-hmm.
that was my first exposure, like seeing Peter Parker swing, in New York. That's how I learned about the Empire State Building, right? Like, and then when I got here and I went there, I was like, oh wow, like there was a connection because I had learned that from that culture. But a lot of people don't understand that it goes both ways, like the good and the bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, one of my first exposure into Black culture was through watching movies where Black people were portrayed as gang members, people in jail, like, and that was like majority of my exposure to Black culture. And then when I got here to America and I see Black people as doctors, educated, smart people, like police officers, and all this spectrum of what, like, it was, to me, it was like, well, what the heck have I been exposed to all my life? So
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying is really, really important. And I even go a step deeper. Like for me, one of my favorite video game franchises is the Assassin's Creed.
Mm.
And one of the
oh yeah,
reasons why is not just about the gameplay,
yeah.
but what Assassin's Creed does so well, or at least in the first few ones, is that I literally used to pause the game and research the stuff that I was seeing.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Like, and this is literally in all the games, from the first one that took place in the Middle East, the one that took place in, Italy, to the ones that were in Egypt, the one, one of my favorite ones was I think it's the third one that talked about American independence and
Oh,
how
the
America came
revolution
to
one.
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
revolution, right?
Yeah.
Like I've never in my life, I've never read more about the American Revolution than when I was playing that third Assassin's Creed. Like
Mm-hmm.
literally. So for me, I think entertainment is, especially in this world today, it gives us an opportunity to step into another person's culture and truly appreciate the entire tapestry, the good, the bad, because every culture has good, every culture has bad. Like, not one is like, this is another thing that annoys me, is when is pushed to one either extreme. Just tell the entire story and give the audience a chance to participate and see the different sides. So yeah, I mean, for Iyanu, it was very, very important for me to do what you said was inspiring for you, which is like give people an opportunity to see something and be like, I want to know more about that. So I'm so fascinated and really happy that that actually happened when you were watching.
Well, one thing I'll say is the food is not fictional. All the food talk
Oh no, that's not.
shows is very real. But you raised an excellent point. When you talk about Sinners, which is not an adaptation, but
Hmm.
Sinners does show an incredible moment of very real, grounded Black history or American
Hmm.
history in
Hmm.
terms of who created the music of the 20th century. That's
Hmm.
really the core of Sinners. No spoiler, but I mean, I'm not talking about all the monsters and stuff, but The core of the movie is who created the 20th century music scene. It was one group, for the most part, and inspired a lot of other people. And then in terms of adaptations, teaching people, we can look at one big one, which was the Watchmen series on HBO.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Now, the funny thing
Correct.
that happened with that adaptation, and I actually did like the first movie. I know some people did. I liked the movie, but the Tulsa bombing sequence at the beginning of episode 1 of the HBO miniseries had people online saying, "Wait a minute, white people destroyed a black Wall Street in Tulsa,
Didn't know about it.
and
I didn't
people,
know.
and I used to teach history, so for me, I knew about it, but a lot of people didn't know about the Tulsa
Mm-hmm.
massacre, right?
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity, a historical opportunity, when you're dealing with culture, when you're dealing with history, you can drop stuff in there, like the walls of Elu. Roy could tell you like where that came from. I didn't know that where the walls
Yeah,
of
the
Elu,
walls of Benin. Yeah,
the walls of Benin,
which are longer than the Great Walls of China, by the way, and a lot of people don't know that either.
right?
Yes, this is factual. It's factual information. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, these are things that, I mean, like I said, entertainment gives you a chance while you're entertaining people. I think you can educate them in a way that obviously you're not, shoving stuff down their throats, because at the end of the day, this is still showbiz, right? We want to entertain people. But like I said, I think some of the best work that has been done is when you can entertain people, but when they leave your work, you get them thinking about, I want to know more about this. Where does this come from?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Assassin's
people are
Creed.
inspired and motivated. It's interesting because I was also a teacher before I came to Hollywood, right? And so one Roger Avery told me, you know what, you're always going to be a teacher no matter what you do,
Mm-hmm.
because I get so excited whenever I see something that inspire, like I'm so excited to dive deeper into that thing, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. I mean, when you say Assassin's Creed
Yeah.
Odyssey, I mean, oh my God.
Yeah.
I
That
mean,
was a
like,
big one.
it took me such a long time to get through the game because I kept pausing it and
Same here.
and
Same.
pulling out my books, and doing internet searches, and I'm
Same
like, "Oh, wait,
exact thing.
what was I was supposed to kill somebody.
Right.
Wait a minute.
Well,
Wait a minute." The world is just so gorgeous, and to
Yeah.
bring it back to Iyanu,
Yeah.
the same thing. I mean, like, part of me is I don't wanna do too much, uh, research because I wanna watch the whole season
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
absorb it
Mm-hmm.
as by itself,
Mm-hmm.
as that piece of artwork,
Mm-hmm.
and then I wanna start doing deeper dives into
Mm-hmm.
it and,
Mm-hmm.
and look more into the culture and of course, I wanna go try, the, Nigerian food now,
oh yeah,
like, yeah.
yeah. I don't think honestly, if you did a deep dive into anything Yoruba specific or even Nigeria, you're going to spoil yourself.
Mhm,
There
okay.
won't be anything that's going to interfere or like you're not going to be shocked or surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like what we did in the first season, and when we get to the final episode, you will be taken on a journey that everything was seeded within the first couple of minutes of the first
Correct.
episode.
Yeah.
Okay, without spoiling anything. So
Yeah.
I say that when you think of this series, just look at it sort of like almost a cliff's notes of Nigerian Yoruba culture. You're going to get these big things, but when
Mm-hmm.
you start like not an avocado, artichoke, you start peeling
Okay.
and peeling and
Uh-huh.
peeling. There's going to be a lot more because I'm African American, but I've never stepped foot on the continent of Africa. Unfortunately, I will change that someday. So for me, I the African people that I grew up with, I don't think were from Nigeria. They may have been Kenyan,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of Kenyan folks, and I think they may have been from Ghana as well. But I didn't really meet a lot of Nigerian folks until probably my college years. Because there's a lot of exchange students from Nigeria and American
Mm-hmm.
universities, especially in legal programs and engineering programs and medical programs.
Medicine. Yeah.
Yeah, big time, big time. But
Mm-hmm.
I still didn't have a window into anything Nigerian except working with Roy. I mean, when I used to live in Harlem, on 116th Street, they have like a little Africa area. So it's a joke I make, but it's like I didn't have a real window into it. And so having Roy in the room, not only as a creator and a producer, but also as our cultural ambassador in a way. And actually, not a
Authenticity is
way, it was
so,
the way.
yeah.
He was out like if there were things that we had. So, for example, getting back to the process, we had several drafts of one script. It would be the first draft, then a mandatory just rewrite in general. Then we had a comedy pass because one of our writers named Ivory Floyd is really funny, and he could find funny moments. And then we would have Roy's pass, which would add in the dialect and some of the slang that
Yeah.
you would hear in a real authentic Nigerian household, as opposed to somebody like me writing it and it would sound like ridiculous. It'd be like, I don't know, that sounded like Yoda. I'd be talking, you know. So that was very much a part of the process, was making sure that authentic Nigerian ideas, language, dialect, food, and references were placed into the script.
That reminds me
Then
of
you
a
feel
story.
immersed in the culture as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story I heard. This is from years ago when Prince of Egypt was made, animated movie.
One of my
So
favorites.
One of my favorites, yeah.
so from my background, my dad, Harvard PhD, his specialty was in ancient languages, specifically dead languages,
Wow.
Mm.
and Judeo-Christian theology, the whole, like Middle East religions.
hmm
That's what he taught.
hmm
At one point, I think he knew a dozen languages, including like Egyptian hieroglyphs and all this. So for him, it was a big deal
Mm.
when the people making that movie
Yeah.
came and asked scholars in his community at the beginning of the
Mhm.
development and creation process for, hey, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Help us make sure
Mhm.
we've got this movie right about this, thousands of year old historical
hmm
story.
hmm
And everybody was shocked because, wait, we only normally get asked at the very end when it's too late to make any changes.
Exactly.
Not at the beginning of the
Exactly.
process when you're doing the
Right.
writing and the planning.
I mean,
And so I love hearing that. It's too rare in Hollywood.
yeah, no, and again, like this is, I was going to bring this up. I think, a lot of credit has to go to Lionforge Entertainment, the producers, and then obviously Cartoon Network and Max, the distributors, because what you said is true, right? These type of things don't happen at the beginning. It's usually maybe in the middle or at the end when someone complains or when they see it's not going the right way or when there's backlash, right? Um, but one of the things that I'm very thankful about Lionforge, you have to understand is that they put, like, I'll use Brandon's word, cultural ambassadors in very, very key areas. Like, so for me, coming in as a creator and executive producer, and then Godwin, who was the illustrator on the graphic novel, becoming the art director. Honestly, I haven't done my research on this, but I can confidently say this is one of the few, if not the first time, where you've had a writer and an artist pair on a graphic novel who have never been showrunner or art director get their first opportunity on those positions on the adaptation of the books, right? So first and foremost, like, you put somebody who is in charge of the art and somebody there who is in charge of the show overall. They are both Nigerians who were born and raised in Nigeria, and then our composer is also Nigerian as well. So you've covered music, art, and then just the overall of the project, and you've put people, you've empowered them to be able to, like Brandon said, allow people to express themselves. But obviously, when something isn't right, stand up and say, "Hey, this is what we need to do." One of the things for me that was important from the beginning was, I wanted, we're doing a show about Nigerian people. They have to talk like Nigerians, right? So we had to hire African and Nigerian voices so that they sound the way people know Nigerians to sound.
Mhm.
And again, that also, even like, we're one of the few shows. I think there's maybe Iwaju, which came out on Disney, but I think we're one of the few shows, or one of two, that have done this, where it's like you have an all African cast on a show like this, right? That's unheard of. And again, you have to understand it from the studio perspective. Like, when studios hear about something that has not been done before, or doing something for the first time, it's very scary. And you have to understand it from, no matter what you think as a creator, you have to be able to understand it from their perspective. At the end of the day, this is show business, right? If we don't make money, we don't get to make more,
Exactly.
right? So, and this is one of the things I always like to tell creators is, you can't take everything personal. You should always fight for what you want, but be
Mhm.
strategic in the way you present things, and also always understand where the studio is coming from, because the more you understand, the easier you can make your point and get your way.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% true. And we were very blessed to have very understanding and receptive executives, not only
Yeah,
just at Lion Force, but also at Warner Brothers. Those
correct.
folks were so understanding and supportive. And I wish I mean, things happen behind the scenes, but I wish I had a much longer opportunity to spend time with those executives because this is something that doesn't happen a lot also, where you have executives who are concerned about the authenticity.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
they were very kind. And that's the word I would use. They were very, very kind from day one and making sure that this show not only reflected Roy's vision, but also wouldn't disrespect Nigeria as a culture and as a nation.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
that was a huge thing that doesn't get discussed a lot. And yeah, that was a huge part of it too.
It's great to hear. As mostly a producer, I love hearing that because I know where I worked, authenticity was also important for,
Mm-hmm.
the games and,
Mm-hmm.
or the source material that we were coming from. And I mean, that's how I first got on in Davis Films in the first place was I'm not Japanese, but my specialty is the Sengoku period of Japan.
Mm.
So I was originally brought in to advise Christoph Gans
Mm-hmm.
on Onimusha.
Wow.
And
Oh,
because
wow.
then I was pulling in Japanese artists. I'm like, okay, well, if you want kimono and the proper attire, I know a professor in Tokyo that, and again, try to pull in all these things to again create authenticity. So I think it is more common than I think we realize, but there's so many layers
Right.
that you end up getting through that ends up getting one of the first thing that's cut off. Kind of like art in school, it's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, we don't really need
Right.
that," and it's like, "Wait a minute, that if you bake it in," and I'm loving hearing you guys say that from the very beginning, because when you bake that stuff in from the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
it is organically added
Mm-hmm.
in. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're not, just the same thing like with your empathy. It
Mm-hmm.
was part of the very beginning. So you're not adding it in, you're not
Mm-hmm.
preaching, you're not,
Mm-hmm.
you're not a teacher. You're having them experience it through your work.
You
And
know what?
yeah,
I mean,
that's
first
really
of all, you
exciting.
had me at Onimusha. That was one of my favorite games back in the day. I love that game. I was gonna not to sidetrack. I was gonna ask you. I mean, have you played Ghost of Tsushima?
Yes.
Okay, that again, that's one of my
Yes.
favorites.
Fantastic.
In the
Yes.
last 10 years, like, but if you look at something like Ghost of Tsushima, right, you can tell, a lot of effort went into making sure it's as authentic as I mean, like this is one of the things where I always try to tell people sometimes about authenticity. It's not just a political card that people play. It actually benefits you
Yes.
as somebody who wants to like. And there's something that Brandon says, and Brandon, don't forgive me if I butcher this. Like the more specific you get, the more global
Mhm.
like
Hmm.
you are, right? And that's just an example. You can tell the amount of love that has gone into the production of that game from the standpoint of being authentic to the culture, with samurai and everything. So it's again, it's a callback to just how for me, it's not always about making these political decisions. It's about
Hmm.
making the right decision. Not just the right thing to do, but it's actually the fiscal thing to do, in my own opinion, because your project will go farther when people can tell that you put a lot of love into making sure whatever it's inspired by actually
Hmm.
gets the appropriate amount of attention.
Yeah, because then it's not political. I mean,
Yes,
like, you look at, like, the TV series Shogun, right?
yes,
The newer version,
beautiful.
right?
Yeah,
It it it's not it wasn't politically motivated at all. It was just
it was
pure
just, yeah,
authentic storytelling, yeah.
correct.
Thank you for listening to Lefty Speaks, the official Vampire Hunter D podcast, hosted by Brandon Easton, Neal Fischer, and Scott McLean. This podcast is created by Unified Pictures and 9 Realms. Narration by Evallen-Muller. Recording and editing by 9 Realms. Produced by Scott McLean and Ian E. Muller. Based on the works created by Hideyuki Kikuchi. Happy hunting.